Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. So glad to have you here this week and that you could spend a little bit of your day with us. And beginning our show today, summer in Nebraska is known for its hot and dry weather. And for many weeks this year, that's definitely been the case, with the western part of the state being the most affected. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh spoke with Extension Cattle Management Specialist Karla Wilke to find out what producers can do to conserve grass and keep their cows fed during these dry spells.
The hot summer weather can take a toll on the grasses of the Great Plains. On top of that, grazing cattle can further deplete resources in the pastures and rangelands. Karla Wilke, a cow-calf stalker management specialist with Nebraska Extension, provides several options for producers to help conserve their grasses during dry periods.
If we provide protein supplement on poor quality forage that's starting to lose a lot of its value because of the hot, dry conditions, then actually supplying a protein supplement actually has the opposite effect on what we're trying to do there, because a lot of times producers feel like they can stretch their forage by providing the cow some supplement. But that protein supplement will just allow the bacteria in the rumen to do a better job of digesting poor quality forage, which will actually cause them to eat more. So that's not a good option, just feeding a protein supplement like that. One thing that we have done some research on is mixing something very palatable and high quality and a very poor quality forage, and feeding that on the pasture can substitute some of the grass that they would normally eat. It is a way to stretch some of the pasture early in the season. That's not really a good option once we know that the pasture's done. That's not gonna prevent overgrazing at that point.
For cow-calf pairs, it's important to consider where they are in the weaning process. If not early weaned, confining to a separate section of the pasture may be the best option.
Early weaning can certainly be an option for drought conditions. It can allow the producers to do a couple of things with the cows. Once the lactation has ceased, then the cow has a much lesser nutrient requirements. So it may allow the producer to put the dry cow back out on the forage, but not the calf. And the calf, as at this point in time, if it's a March-born calf or earlier, is certainly starting to eat. You know, a couple options there. You can wean the calves and then put calves back out on grass, or wean them and put the cows back out. So separate units will consume less, and so that's certainly an option. You could just early wean and leave everything confined, and you could limit feed the cow, which just simply means that we're going to formulate a diet that meets all of her nutrient requirements, but that we limit how much actual feed she's fed.
The breeding season is another factor producers need to take into account. If there is limited availability of grass, the success rate of conception may be lower than other times of the year.
There are a lot of producers in Nebraska who have shifted to more of a later spring calving, which might be late April through May. And so that puts the cow on a decreasing plane of nutrition during a time that she's trying to rebreed. And so some supplementation for that cow may be necessary to keep her on a parallel, or at least, you know, an increasing, if not just constant, plane of nutrition, so that she will continue to cycle and get bred with that next calf. And so that may be of concern to producers as well.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
You can find more information on managing cattle on the Market Journal website. Let's get a look at what's making news in the markets this week, and I'm joined by Darin Fessler. He's a senior hedge advisor with Lakefront Futures and Options. Darin, always enjoy having you on the show. And as I'm looking at this week's USDA Crop Progress Report, we can see that Nebraska corn and soybeans continue to be in good shape and ahead of schedule. So if you could break down for us what we're seeing here and in some of our surrounding states.
Yeah, I think if you take a look at the crop conditions and how everything has panned out so far, obviously Iowa seems to be the circle on the map. There is obviously some concerns in the west central parts of Iowa. There's no doubt about that. Where if you spoke to clients and producers there, even 4 weeks ago, a lot of them were saying, especially northwest Iowa, there is a potential of a record crop. Now you talk to them, boy, it might be lucky to make 200. But there's other areas of the country that are performing very, very well. Minnesota being one of them. Minnesota, I've said before publicly, I think that state is not only going to crush their yield record, but it's going to be a record that's going to hold for probably some time because the weather has just been so ideal for the growers up there. And you take a look at Nebraska, for example. If you've missed the green snap, the wind, the hail, there's a good chunk of Nebraska that is going to be fairly good. If you've had some of that green snap issue, some of the weather issues, you probably don't feel that way. But if you've missed it, I think the yields are going to be pretty impressive, especially in the southeast part of the state. You take a look at Illinois; they've got some really good rains here, and so Illinois in itself probably going to be 200 plus as a state average.
I heard someone being interviewed one time, and he was asked what expectations were to where the market could move. And he responded, just tell me what the forecast looks like. So that being said, how does the weather play into the volatility of the markets right now?
Yeah, you want to have that good grain fill for corn. Obviously, with Iowa being a little dry and being the largest corn producer, they've missed a lot of that rain that really is probably going to push their grain fill. And a lot of that stuff in Iowa has probably pollinated just fine. It's not that pollination is usually not the issue here in this case. It is the lack of moisture is really going to fill out that ear. So the weather can play a big role here, especially in August, where you're going to have the beans be kind of the center of attention now. For the corn market, though, the weather story is kind of come and pass a little bit here. Yes, you want the cooler nights, you want the nice sunny days and the rain to really, fill out the ears. But on the bean side of things, this is where the beans really start to show their weakness or strength here. And if you get some rains and the weather's ideal here, as FC Stone had earlier this week, the potential for these bean yields, and I agree with them, it could be pretty impressive, especially in relation to corn.
Let me squeeze in a question about ethanol. And when we look at that, the market still has some recovering to do from earlier this year due to all the effects from COVID. But it's also facing an uncertain demand future. How do we make our decisions in that area?
Yeah, I think if you look at ethanol, and it's like any market, whether you're talking crude oil or equity markets, and grains are in this case too, the markets don't like uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty like the ethanol side of things, you have an economy are we going to really go back to shutting this down after, a lot of people say there's going to be another phase of this virus come this winter and this fall. How is the market going to respond to that? Are we really going to go back home? Are we working more remotely? We're working remotely. I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And that driving demand is still going to be hurt there. So I still think that because of the lack of interest in maybe driving the remote and the uncertainty about the economy, there's going to be uncertainty about ethanol. And that's really what's going to hurt this corn market.
And Darin, the August WASDE report coming out next week, that's the first report of the season where USDA actually uses field observations to determine yields for corn and soybeans. So what are some things that you think we're going to see with this report, and what can we expect prices to do following the August WASDE?
Well, as in the July WASDE, the USDA didn't move the needle at all on anything. So that makes the all-important August, which is really typically not friendly for producers here. Watch what's going on with the yield. Now, granted, Iowa kind of throws things for a little bit of loop here when it comes to the corn yield because of the dryness, but I still think the USDA comes in here, raises the corn yield just a little bit, and I think that as right now, as the beans are progressing along here, conditions remain pretty favorable. I would not be surprised USDA step in here, raise that yield on the beans as well too. Watch what China's doing, stepping in, buying a lot of corn, buying some beans here. How does the USDA view that from an export standpoint? Because if we stay on the same course we are on as far as the potential of these beans, that could negate a little bit of this increased export demand from China.
And we're also getting to the time of year when farmers need to be getting that post-harvest grain marketing plan together. What are some questions we need to be asking ourselves when developing that strategy?
I think you always have to be looking forward, not only, next month, 3 months, 6 months, look out 12 to 18 months ahead here and figure out, okay, what really is our potential going to be for next year, and utilize the carries in the market for your benefit here. But right now we're in that seasonally bearish period for corn. Difficult for any of these grains to really rally at this time of the year, but you really got to be thinking about further along here. What, at harvest, how much storage do I have? How much cash flow do I need? Certain times of thing. So it's really coming down to the cash flow needs, because I know a lot of people are playing the PLC and the insurance game. Keep in mind, a lot of those, the payments and the checks are not going to be written probably before a lot of those cash flow needs to be met.
In terms of corn and soybean exports, could you tell me what they've been like, and if you have any guesses as to what's next?
I could see the USDA raising the exports a little bit on this corn. I could probably see them raising exports a little bit on these beans as well. Now, granted, this is the time frame of the year where the U.S. does get some export business. Now, with a lot of projections out of Brazil early on, they're saying, hey, we potentially could have a record corn crop, a record bean crop. How does China view that? Are we kind of the insurance policy for China for right now? I somewhat believe that, but I also believe that China right now really physically needs the grain, because if you watch what China's been doing on their own auctions, they've been selling 100% of their corn at auction. So I think there's a true need for China to step in here, continue to buy the product, because I think there's a real need there.
And Darin, as we wrap up here, any final marketing advice, risk management tips, or selling strategies that you'd like to leave us with today?
Yeah, I think you need to look at some of these carries. These carries have taken a little bit of while to develop, both in the corn and the bean markets. They're really starting to widen out now. And so I think you've got to take a look at where we are next year. How does South America start off early when we get further along in this fall, this winter, and start taking a look at next year's production and where our prices are, and take advantage of those carries.
Next week, we'll be joined by Lee Schultz of Iowa State University. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, out here in Lincoln at the Market Journal Studios, we've had a pretty nice week in terms of the weather. Good time to get out and walk some fields. How's this next week shaping up?
Yes, Troy, it's been a beautiful week. This last week with this cooler temperatures coming in reminds us almost like what we'd expect to see in early fall coming into the September period. So we'll take that little bit of cool down during the dog days of summer, as they like to say. We know we're going to see the heat and humidity is coming back this weekend. We're probably going to be dealing with a little bit more of it before August is over with. So overall, the biggest issue going forward now is the dryness across the state, where we do have some problems, and whether or not we're going to see some widespread precipitation before the heat turns into earnest. We have that scattered thunderstorm activity has helped a little bit in the southwest and parts of central Nebraska, but we have not really seen much in the way of significant moisture in western Nebraska. Unfortunately, I don't have much positive to say as we go into this forecast, but as we go into this forecast, there are opportunities for some significant severe weather, particularly in this first 24 hours of this forecast. So let's get right up to the models. As you can see from today's upper air model run this morning, we have that ridge that's building into the region, but we also have a trough to our northwest, and a little bit of energy is going to ride around that ridge, developing some thunderstorm activity in the Black Hills. And if that congeals and moves eastward during the overnight hours, we could see a very significant severe weather outbreak, particularly across northern and southern portions, northern Nebraska and southern portions of South Dakota. More importantly, we get a brief cool down across the northern half of the state. We're probably going to be closer to normal in the southern half of the state. As that upper air low moves toward the east, we'll see some low pressure development in northwestern Kansas, and that may get a little bit of lift and get some scattered showers in southeast Nebraska, but no great coverage. And we kind of go into a zonal flow. So we're going to be fairly close to normal temperatures. High pressure starts to shift off to our east. That's going to bring a little bit of southeasterly flow, maybe generating enough moisture to generate some thunderstorm activity or shower activity in southeastern Nebraska, but winds to our north and our east. By Tuesday, the ridge tries to get building, but there's still a little bit of a weakness in the bottom of that ridge. We'll see low pressure developing in southwest Nebraska, trying to move eastward. Once again, some isolated showers, particularly across northern Nebraska, but nothing widespread. And then Wednesday, that ridge starts to build back up and the heat starts to return in earth. We're back up into the 90s. We do see low pressure trying to develop in northwest Kansas. That may generate enough lift with the moisture to give us some thunderstorm activity. But I think the most of the storms will move around the periphery of that ridge, particularly northeast Nebraska. And then on Thursday, that ridge really builds toward the north. Very, very hot day in store if the forecasts are correct. Low pressure up in eastern Montana will bring deep southerly flow up into our region. So it's going to be a very hot, humid air mass ahead of us, but we'll see most of the convection remaining to our east. By Friday, the GFS model breaks down that ridge. I'm not so certain about breaking it down this quickly, but we're still going to be warmer than normal. But it does indicate that there's some energy that will try to move out of the Rockies across northern Nebraska and the Dakotas, generating some thunderstorm activity, and some monsoonal flow will start moving into the region. If that's the case, it's going to be very, very humid across western Nebraska. And as we go out farther from next Thursday to the following Tuesday, it really keeps that ridge in place. So we're going to see well above normal temperatures, particularly centered over western Nebraska. And in terms of precipitation, well below normal precipitation. So overall, it doesn't look very favorable as we get to the middle of the month for precipitation in those drought areas of the state. So Troy, overall, the best chances for widespread precipitation are this next 24 hours, and we get scattered chances during this next 7-day period. But it looks like during the midweek, we cool down just slightly before we rebuild that heat in the next weekend. So overall, not a promising precipitation forecast statewide.
Thanks, Al. Next up, leafy spurge can be a pervasive problem in rangelands throughout Nebraska. And of course, early detection and rapid response is key before it gets out of control and you have to spend that extra money to manage it effectively. Market Journal's Bill Dodd sat down with Extension educator Gary Stone to learn more about leafy spurge.
By the most recent tally, Nebraska currently has 22.6 million acres of rangeland, covering roughly 46% of the Cornhusker state. Rangelands are lands on which the native vegetation is predominantly perennial grasses, grass-like plants, forbs, and shrubs, or dispersed trees, and the occasional invasive weed. Leafy spurge, also known as wolf's milk, has been particularly problematic for western rangeland as it spreads in a uniquely aggressive manner.
Why it's a problem in our state as well as others is that once it gets established, it's very hard to get rid of the plant. It has an extensive root system. It spreads its seeds in a unique way that's different from quite a few other plants. So this plant being a perennial forb, it will obviously come back from the same rootstock every year, but the horizontal roots can spread laterally 15 feet, and there's buds on those roots that can pop up and start a new plant from that. The unique thing about the plant is that when the seeds mature, that plant can actually throw them 10 to 15 feet from that stem. So that's how it can spread with its seeds. So it's quite a bit different than a lot of other plants.
Leafy spurge is considered a noxious weed, and by state law, that means the problem must be dealt with by the landowner. At the very least, the landowning entity is tasked with minimizing the spread of the species, or at best, completely snuffing it out. Naturally, the first step to eradicating this particular species is being able to identify it.
The plant has kind of from a distance and up close, it has kind of a lime yellow-green color to it. It's as with this year when our yellow sweet clover is blooming, they both look very similar from a distance. So you actually have to get out of the truck or the vehicle and go over and check and see just what you have. The seeds, there's 3 seeds per floweret. You can see that. The other thing to check is to break open the stem. And if it's leafy spurge, it will have a white milky sap coming out of it. And that's a characteristic that's pretty unique to that plant.
One reason leafy spurge is highly problematic for landowners is the fact that grazing livestock could potentially fall ill or be fatally compromised by this particular plant. However, some animals have shown resiliency to the plant and have served as a means to maintaining control over the weed in some areas.
There's an irritant in the sap and that can cause problems with horses, cattle, sheep, and goats. And it can cause their death if they eat too much of it. However, people have been able to use sheep and goats as a cultural practice to graze down the top vegetation to keep the plant from going to seed, as long as they have other forbs, other grasses to eat, that they don't make leafy spurge its sole source of food for those two animals. There are actually a number of people have gone out and started a business with herds of goats going around in areas such as Denver that have leafy spurge where they can't spray, and they will have these herds of goats go in and at least graze down the top growth of leafy spurge.
While there are options of biological control, such as grazing sheep, goats, and root-feeding beetles to help deter the spread of the weed, there are also an array of options when it comes to chemical treatment methods and application timetables. However, it is not recommended to try and take it out by the root.
You about have to excavate anywhere from 1 foot to maybe as many as 15 or 16 feet deep. So that's not going to be a very good viable option. Okay, as I said before, if they got somebody locally that has goats and they want to try and graze it down, and they have enough animals to cover the area without getting sick, that is a very good viable option to keep them going to seed. The other thing they could do is probably use a burn down herbicide or something like a 2,4-D just right at the advent of flowering to burn the top growth down. It will not do anything for the root structure, but at least it'll prevent it or minimize the seed coming off those plants for that season. The best time to treat would probably be in the fall when the plant is putting all of its food stalks down into the roots, so the chemical will go with it and work on the roots. Spring treatments, or just prior to or right at flowering to keep minimize it from going to seed, would be the other option, and that would be probably midsummer. Spring treatments could be an option, but I think the fall treatments have shown to be a better way to go.
If spotted, early detection and rapid response with an integrated pest management plan will not only be crucial in stopping this noxious weed, but may also reduce the long-haul cost of long-term control endeavors. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. If you'd like more information on leafy spurge, we've got a link to an article that Gary wrote about the topic. You can find that on the Market Journal website. And you can also view a whole lot more information on the subject and other invasive species by visiting extensionpubs.unl.edu and searching spurge or invasive. Finally today, earlier in the show, we mentioned some ways to manage cattle during dry conditions. Well, another product of dry weather is dry fields. The cost of irrigation can be one of the biggest categories in a producer's budget, especially during drought years. Nebraska Extension Cropping Systems educator Steve Melvin shared with us some management tips to help keep those costs down.
Well, the energy that's spent on irrigation in Nebraska is typically the biggest energy cost on any farm, that irrigates. And so it's a big dollar decision every year.
Irrigation may be costly, but it can mean the difference between a plentiful yield or a barren one. Extension educator Steve Melvin says there are 3 main strategies to keep in mind when scheduling irrigation.
Basically, the first one is just kind of, it's a management zone is what I call it. And basically, when you're taking a look at data, it's got, about right in the middle, and it's got too much water on the top and not enough on the bottom, and it's just kind of driving between the lines. Second one is, I call it a depleted zone, and basically the idea is that we deplete some of the water down in that 12 to 24 inch zone, preferably during the vegetative stage. But the idea is there we can keep the top layer very wet and allow with irrigation, and we can allow the little bit deeper soil to be used, the water to be used out of that soil area, and then we can monitor that with our soil water monitoring equipment, and it gives us a look that we don't see otherwise if we just keep the whole profile wet. And then we can take those numbers from the soil water monitoring equipment, do some calculations, and come up with a percent of plant available water. And that's the one that most producers are probably the most familiar with over the years. Might have 80% plant available water left in the profile or something. And then also we can take it to actually calculating the physical volume of water. And that's really handy for determining how many days or before we need to irrigate again, or towards the end of the season, trying to use up all of the water that's in the profile. So we can leave it as empty as we can without hurting crop yield, so we can take advantage of the off-season precipitation lower our energy bill.
Not every field's irrigation schedule will be the same. Different crops need different watering schedules, so it's important to know when your crops will benefit most from additional irrigation.
Well, for corn, the most sensitive time for water management is around tassel and early grain fill. And so actually, as we go on later into the summer, we kind of get past that, and the corn's less sensitive. And so we don't need to worry about it quite as much. We can use a little bit more water deeper in the profile. With soybeans, it's kind of that end of July time period here through August is when we get into the really important time for soybeans. And so during that time, and the same thing around, right now we're kind of in tassel, pollination with corn, and a lot of fields are just past at the early grain fill. And those are the most critical times. And so right now is when we really need to be keeping our crop as well watered as we can. And then we can start to taper off as we get on towards the middle of August and later. And again, those calculations are really critical to help us figure out how much water's left and how we kind of slowly use that up as the crop matures.
Steve says this decision can be difficult to make on a yearly basis simply because of Mother Nature.
You never know when it's going to rain. We know it's going to rain once in a while, or at least we hope it does, but we don't know when that rain is going to come. And so it's different than a lot of the other input decisions. It just needs some careful consideration, collecting the data that you need to make a good decision and then analyzing it.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
For more information and examples, Steve recommends producers review the Irrigation Scheduling Strategies publication. There's also a set of how-to videos on the Crop Watch YouTube page, and we've got links to all of that under this story on the Market Journal website. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app and follow us on social media so you can join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.